The Scene on Screen podcast presents Three Men and a Meeple. Are you interested in playing games that don't appear on a screen? Well, that's why we're here. Join David, Sean, and Owen while they talk about all things tabletop. Now pass the dice, because our next turn starts now. Welcome to another exciting episode of Three Men and a Meeple. That's right, we changed our name, and maybe next week we'll change it again, but who knows? We are no longer,
probably not.
because we are too hard to find on the internet. Three Men and a Meeple have not been taken, and we are glad you are here with us. We've got myself, we've got David, and we've got our newest full-time host, Owen, because you guys loved him so much. Boy,
hey,
how are you?
excellent.
I like that.
I'm doing great. You know,
Doing
we
so
decided to tell Owen that he can't leave us, so
Yeah.
he's going to be here every episode for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to be in the background.
Yeah, just breathing heavily into the mic.
Can you imagine? We're like, oh man, we have to record something. Owen, can you log in and say nothing?
Yeah, it's my presence will, it'll go through the mic and it'll be good.
Well, I mean, I've got to say we're really excited to have you guys all here with us. The support has been overwhelming, and we thank you very much for tuning in and spending some time with us learning about board games and the ins and outs as to why David hates Catan. But enough about David. Let's first figure out what we all played this week. I know I had a calm week. It was more board games than video games, which was really, really crazy for me. But after playing Azul with you guys last weekend, I tried it again with Krissa, and I got to say I found it way more interesting when the math did itself.
The scoring in that game, like the rule, like we're talking about rule books, but yeah, the scoring in the rule book is a little confusing to me as well.
Yeah,
so,
when a computer could do it all, amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I didn't really play anything the last little while. I actually ended up lending a bunch of games to one of my coworkers.
Nice.
That was exciting for me. When you're actually given the ability for someone to experience something. This is kind of like, what we had talked about in our last two episodes, like bringing those new experiences to your friends who otherwise have not really seen anything other than, Monopoly and Scrabble and stuff like that. So I lent them Azul a few weeks ago, and they absolutely loved it. And then they ended up giving it back, feeling like they had it for too long. And I'm like, you know what? I have so many games. If you want to try anything else, like I have a bunch of new games that you have never played, right? So I ended up giving them to borrow Machikoro, Horrified, Royals, and I gave them Azul back because they love that one back. They love that one so much. So I didn't really play anything, but I gave the gift of games to someone.
Now, did you lend it to them, or are you just having them? Are you storing them at this person's place? Is it like a win-win for both of you in this situation? You're like, okay.
Yeah, they're kind of being stored because I told them, I was like, there's no rush to get them back to me, right?
Oh, yeah, that's definitely a storage.
Yeah, it's like, you can borrow these great games. Here, take them. They're like, I don't want them. We're like, take the games.
Yeah, just like the few that I have at your place right now.
Yeah. We've been playing them and having so much fun with them, but we're not going to play them with you.
Yeah, I know. But really exciting. I finally got some replacement parts in for two of my games, or it's one game, but the game with the expansions. It's Heroes of Earth, Air and Sea Order.
Yeah.
By Gamelin Games. It is a massive, Sean, you would probably really like it. It's kind of a mix of like fantasies and Risk, with area control and. Yeah. But the game is massive, and it has these you get these little airship things that the miniatures sit on, but they float above the board on these clear acrylic stands. And in the base game, when you get it, the stands were just thrown in like a little baggie. So literally, when you open up the box, they're just all shattered.
Oh, of course,
right? So I sent a request in, and actually, Owen, you've gotten some replacement parts, right? How long it can take. It can take forever, right?
Like weeks. If they show up, you're like, oh my god, I can't believe I got it.
They showed up in about 2 weeks from Texas or something like that, wherever they sent it from.
Oh,
and
Texas.
They came in a nice vacuum formed tray that holds them all. So I'm like, oh, excellent. They actually gave some good packaging.
They must have had a lot of people send them back, and they probably
Oh
were
yeah,
like, all right, we got to fix this. And they
the the
probably,
forums on the Board Game Geek for that game and on Reddit, most of them have some sort of comment about broken airship stands.
Yeah, I don't think I have a table large enough to play this game.
Oh yeah, I have. So the base game, the box is so big that it doesn't even fit on a Calyx shelf. Like
oh,
it's the dimensions are too wide to fit in one of the cubbies there.
everybody has Calyx shelves. They should have. They
I know,
should
right?
have made the
The
box the
box
right
is the
size.
box is massive. So I have the base game, and then I got the 5 to 6 player expansion, which adds 4 more races. So like there's a lot to be
A lot to do.
to do in this game. I think Owen, you would like it too because it kind of you like Twilight Imperium.
Yeah.
Oh no,
I
you
agree.
hate Twilight Imperium. I
No,
forgot
no,
about
no.
that.
I love Twilight Imperium. I
I've
love
never
it.
once heard him talk about Twilight Imperium as
I
if it
know.
was his favorite game.
You know, I think this might be a good game for the three of us to play once we finally can start traveling freely within our province. It's got a little bit of everything that we all
Okay.
enjoy.
I'm not going to
Okay.
lie to you. I'm looking at it going, wow, there's like ships and stuff. I totally want to try this. And I'm already contemplating buying it without knowing anything about it. This is
I
my problem.
I think it's on sale at Board Game Bliss for like more than half off. It's like
Yeah, it was like
70% off right now.
$60.
Yeah. Which is
But
like down
Bliss,
from like
closed
200.
forever.
here's the thing. Don't buy it because I have a copy of it, and if you don't like it, then you're not sitting there with this big ass box that you can't fit anywhere.
You can
Dude,
give
we
it
have
to
no
me.
room for anything right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. My board game room's a mess. It's just board games everywhere.
Yeah.
So-
What about you, Owen? What did you get up to the last few weeks?
So, yesterday, broke out Dinosaur Island for the first time. That was awesome. We played Solar Storm for the first time. That was awesome. We played a game of Machi Koro last night. Also, that was great. Tried Dead Man Tells No Tales for the first time the other night as well. That was an awesome pirate themed treasure getting game. So I've been busy. Been busy
Wow.
with board games.
Did
It
you?
must be nice to have somewhere and someone to play with.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Wow. Did you end up trying your sketchy copy of Secret Hitler?
I opened it up thinking like, oh man, this is going to be trash. I'm going to have to send it back, get a refund, and like buy a full price copy. No, legit. It was like absolutely beautiful.
I'm very bummed I didn't jump on that. I'm not going to lie.
Well, like it's so sketchy because like there's so many copies of this game that are, and like it could, if it's a forgery, it's a perfect forgery. Like everything's in there. It looks great.
Mm.
So I'm very excited to play it.
Well, I know around Christmas time, I found a copy randomly at a the calendar clubs, and
Yeah.
I messaged David. I'm like, "Is this normal?" Like, I thought it was banned in Canada for numerous reasons, and he was like, "Did you buy it?" And he responded so late that I didn't go back and get it.
Oh.
But
I've seen it a few spots, a few stores as well, around like $40 or $50. But so I had to look into this. There was some controversy a few years ago in Quebec where it was pulled off shelves. But I haven't actually found anything explicitly saying that the game itself is banned. I think it's just one of those games that retailers
Don't really want to stock.
don't like to stock because people don't understand that you aren't playing as Hitler. It's kind of like a parody of like fascism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's and how it's bad.
Or
So
how powerful it is.
yeah, right. And so I think that's why a lot of retailers don't carry it. So that's why it's harder to find. And when it does come in, it can be pretty expensive. So yeah, Owen, you paid like what, $20 for that?
Yeah, it's crazy. Also, well, at Mind Games, they have an entire shelf just of Secret Hitler. So it's not like they don't care. They're just like, hey.
They're just playing mind games with everyone.
Yeah.
well, yeah, like at least with the calendar club, you could see them not caring because they open in November and close in January.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's good information to know because I was under the impression that it was banned. Even when we went to one of the board game stores we went to, we asked about it, And he was like, yeah, we don't carry that game. And we just assumed based off the information we had that it was because of that reason.
Yeah, no, I remember reading about the controversy in Quebec a few years ago when that happened, but didn't really think too much of it because it's one of those games that you need like 5 people to play it,
It's
right?
5 to 10. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
think 5 to 10.
it's one of those games that if
Party
I
game.
can't play it with a small group of people, then it's kind of lower on my list of games that I want to get. So
Yeah, we have a whole shelf of party games that like we barely break out because we never have enough people, or the situation's not the right situation to break a game like that out. But that was last week's topic. Um,
It's a similar mechanic to like the resistance, right? The
yeah.
more people, the better.
Oh,
yeah,
exactly. You want to try to max out that player limit. If you want to get like, if you want to try to get maybe like the lower side 5, sure, but you want to get like 8 to 10 people to make that really a great experience, like how it was intended to be played.
Yeah. Before we get into the show's topics, have you played the resistance with 5 people? It's awful. It's so easy to figure out.
I have not actually. I haven't. I think I have the resistance, but I haven't played it yet.
It's incredibly easy to figure out who the two bad guys are when there's 5 people at the table.
So
it'd
would it
probably be really
scale?
easy to play it with Owen because he's
I would just be like, I'm the bad guy.
starts
But
twirling his mustache.
yeah, like put my fake mustache on and start twirling it. Does it scale? Like, does it? So, like, if you have 5 people, would it be only one bad guy, or is it still two?
Yeah, the
I don't know.
resistance scales, I think, up to 4 members out of 10, I think.
Okay,
David, you might
yeah,
have to correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not sure. I haven't played
Um,
yeah.
it.
Because
it,
Dark Moon does that, where like if you're playing with a certain amount of people, you have a certain amount of people who are like the traitor, the infected. So if you have 7 people, you have 3 infected. If you have 5 people, you have 2, kind of thing.
it's just always hilarious to me when it's like you're playing one of these games and the basic rule of thumb is everybody lets the first mission slide so nobody gets exposed and
Right.
people fail it. But let's get to why we are here. We're obviously here to talk about board games, and now we are talking about step 3, explaining the rules of the game. So we're going to go through a
Well,
series of
is it a step system? Is this like a?
well, like
It's not really a step system. It's
This
not
is
like
phase 3
like
of
a
the
yeah,
phase
rules.
three
it's our
of.
board game program. Welcome to step
We have
3.
like we have like
Yeah.
a learning system. Yeah, this one we're just talking about rules.
Yeah.
Rules of the game.
And yeah, more so about what makes rules good or bad, and then how can you segue or teach those rules to people. Our first 2 episodes, we kind of talked about good introduction games for people who haven't played board games, and then good games to introduce them to, and then a little more advanced games as well. But a big part of getting people to play games is being able to explain them to them, right?
Yeah.
And there, in our experience, especially Owen and mine, we have hundreds of rule books to read, right? So I find that the rule books can really make or break a game from the get go. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about just like some techniques and the ways that we go about learning new games and how we teach them to people. And then we're going to dive into a little more in depth about specific rule books, about what makes them good, bad. Does the length of the rule book affect how good the game is or how good the rules are? What do we think about reference guides, stuff like that? And then just some challenges of teaching games to people.
Cool.
Yeah.
So do you want? Let's start off with the basics. Now, I'm very pro easy, but what makes a rule book good versus bad? To give you an example, I'm very simple. I like one sheet or one pagers, anything with a bunch of pages where I have to leaf through. It's a little bit harder for me to really get into and digest, especially before starting a new game. But I'll defer the topic to the experts here. What makes a rule good or bad? Or a rule book good or bad, sorry.
Well, to me, a good rule book, like very well laid out, very clear. Everything's nice and organized. You have good reference material. Like usually in the back there'll be like a glossary of all the terms. Maybe there'll be on the very back page there's a nice breakdown of the phases. And a lot of these bigger board game companies have like figured out how to make these really well put together good rule books. Um, and it makes the experience of putting a game down, opening it up, and learning it a lot easier. And then at the same point, teaching it to be like, if someone's like, oh, hey, like I don't know what this does, and you can go to the glossary and simply point to it and say, oh, here's what it is, and here's what it does.
Well, I think this is a difficult kind of topic in general, just because it depends on the person reading the rule book, right? Like Sean just said that he likes, the leaflet style books.
Right.
Whereas I personally find that leaflet style books are good for some games, but if the game has some like more depth to it than just, playing cards or rolling a few dice, I find that there needs to be deeper explanation to game mechanics and stuff like that in the rule book.
Right. So yeah,
like Machikoro is a prime example, I think. The rule book for that game is fairly small.
It's like 4 pages.
But it goes in depth enough to actually explain everything that you're doing in there.
Yeah,
right?
You don't really have any questions. By the time you're reading it and you play like a round or two, you're like, okay, this all makes sense. Like I don't need to go back to the rule book very much, or maybe once or twice to look up a small rule, but you're not going back every 5 seconds to be like, oh, what does this do? Or what does this do? And I, like for the leaflet games, like those are like kind of the smaller box games. When I'm kind of referring to like those bigger games that will take longer or have a lot more rules. But yeah, those small leaflet games, like those rules are usually pretty compact and pretty well written.
Okay. So, Owen, let me ask you this then, because we've just gone over what makes a rule book good versus bad. When you sit down at the table and you're trying to determine the best way to learn a new game, do you start reading through the rule book first? Do you watch a Let's Play on YouTube, or do you just dive right in and try and figure it out? I know some games have the mechanic that allows you to just kind of grab and go, but I would think logically most games require you to at least take a glance at the rules, whether the rule book be 12 pages long or one.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of really great learn to plays online. So you have like Watch It Played, you have games or you have channels like Dice Tower, and they will set down a game and they will just walk you through the setup, walk you through what a turn would look like, walk you through kind of any kind of general how the game goes. And then if you have the game, you can like open up the rule book and get those kind of like fiddly little details. But they do a really good job of explaining a game and getting you moving. And that's for like really popular games like Dead of Winter, there isn't a lot of newer games that I do that with. Usually I'll just break open the rule book myself and just go through it.
Yeah, Watch It Played is a great example for those people who haven't seen that kind of content. It's great. I used to follow what was it called? The Will Wheaton one before he left.
Oh, what was that called?
Oh, Tabletop. I think it was actually called
Tabletop. It's just called Tabletop.
Kind of sounds like Table Talk, or something. So, David, just going on to the rest of that topic, when we're looking at learning a new game, we've obviously, Owen and I have determined that, yes, it's great to always take a look at the rule book first, because in 9 times out of 10, you are always going to at least look at the basic mechanics of the game. However, my question is, when you're teaching a new game to somebody and you've sat down at the table and 50% of the table hasn't played the game, do you go off your knowledge, or do you introduce the rule book and pass it around? How do you go about doing it?
Well, I think a big part of it is the person who's teaching it has to have a pretty good understanding of the game. And not everyone is good at teaching games. right? Like they're
That's
not good
me.
at
I'm not.
they're not good at explaining things, right?
That's me. I'm not
Um,
good at that.
so a prime example of me having to teach a game to some people, or at least explain it, is I feel like you kind of have to sell the game as well when you're trying to teach it, right? Because some games can be so big and daunting that there can be so much going on that you're going over that it can just become a deterrent to someone who is either new to the genre or new to the game, or just is kind of unsure about whether or not they might enjoy it. So Fury of Dracula is a prime example. Owen and I and some of our other friends, we got together. This was a few months ago, and I brought this game over. I bought it, I don't know, probably about just over like almost 2 years ago, before the whole pandemic thing even started. Actually, no, it was just before pandemic season. Um,
Pandemic
and
season.
and so it's a game that you need at least 3 people to play, and for the longest time, I was busy with school, work, all that stuff, so never really got around to playing it. But we decided that we were going to play it, and I was like, okay, I have to read this rule book because there's a lot to this game. So I sat down one afternoon and I read through the rule book. I took all the components out. I looked at things so that I could at least understand what the rule book was referencing, and then I put it all back and I brought it over. And as I was explaining this to Owen, and I was trying to sell the game as well, right? But I find that in that game, and other games do the same thing, where the rules can be more detailed, almost to the point where they're confusing for simple mechanics. So
Right.
for Fury of Dracula, literally, I just dumbed it down to, okay, this is what Dracula does. He has these cards. He's going to be in these hidden cities or whatever, and this track moves up. And then the hunters do these things, blah, 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 blah. So explain the basics so that everyone can kind of get to the table and understand their goal, what is happening in the game. And then as things go through, I like to teach while playing. Some games don't really allow it, right? So some games, like if it's, and we've done this a few times on, where like we'll play
Yeah.
like a few rounds and then reset the game,
Right.
at least so that people kind of have an idea on what to do.
Yeah, and we actually did that the other night when we were playing Dinosaur Island, where we were reading the rules, like because the rule book is set out in like here's the introduction, here's phase one, here's phase two, and all the rules for each phase, and we're reading through it. It's like I don't know, maybe 8-10 pages, and we're like getting to the like almost the end. I'm just like, let's just start playing. Like this rule book is set out in a way that you could play the first phase.
Mm-hmm.
There's all the rules. Play the second phase. That's all the rules. So, and I find that's the situation where like it sometimes sitting back and having somebody, even if they kind of dumb it down or they paraphrase the rule book just to get things moving.
Yeah.
Like it's nice to have those games where you can just be like, all right, let's just start and like, we'll figure it as we go.
And there are some games where we've actually had to sit down and read through the rulebook together. Cthulhu, Death May Die was a prime example. We played that one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we did.
Where I've played the game a few times, but there's a lot to that game, right? There's a lot of little things that you have to do and game mechanics. The game itself is actually pretty easy to pick up and play once you play it, but you have to kind of go in and you have to know what your characters are able to do and how things work, right? Because like you have your character board with all the character stats and everything like that, and then there's monsters movement, enemy movement, all that stuff. So when we played that one, we set the game up, and then I just quickly went through the rule book for the most important things that we need to do. So like character movement, health, attacking, item management, all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like that's also another very viable option. But the problem with doing that is that if people don't learn that way, it's kind of difficult for people to. It can be difficult for people to retain that information.
Yeah,
I'd agree. I look at some games, even like Seven Wonders or Seven Wonders Duel. You have a long rule book, and sometimes when calls are made during the game, you have to actually take the time to like leaf through the book to try and kind of figure out what you've done or what hasn't been done. And it's still very daunting for somebody who's maybe not, like, everybody plays board games their entire lives, but I would consider myself a beginner at this point when it comes to more advanced games, right? Or intermediate to advanced games. So my next question is, now that we've gone over the rule books, we've gone over why we want to use the rule book almost exclusively to teach games. Does the length of the rule book determine how good the game is, and whether or not you would teach it to some people?
Yeah, the length of a rule book, I don't think determines how good a game is. Like, I have a few smaller card games that have just a one sheet rule book, like you said, like Leaflet, and they're just tons of fun. And I have some games that have 30, 40 page rule books, and I would break them out like every once in a while. Like, that doesn't really determine how good a game is.
Okay. I think the length of a rule book could be a deterrent to learning and teaching a game.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if you get a book that, Gloomhaven, for example,
it's like a 60-page rule book or something.
Right.
Yeah, it's insane.
I've had some other games where the rule books are like 25, 30 pages. And for someone like me who is more, I would say, more of a seasoned board gamer, it's not that big of a deterrent. I actually see those things and kind of be like, oh my God, there's like a ton of content in this game. Like, there's a lot to take in. But at the same time, it can make it very difficult to teach the game if you are constantly having to reference the rule book. And really the biggest thing, like, the bigger the rule book is, as long as it's organized properly, then
Right.
it's easier to teach. But I find that there are some companies that are notorious for having like really big, thick rule books, or rule books that are just really long because like they're filled with a bunch of other like images and stuff like that. Cool Mini or not, I feel they're they're one of those, right?
Yeah,
like the rule books.
Arcadia Quest is like that. Like, it'll be like, it's like a 20-page rule book, but like some of the pages are like 3/4 is just images and like graphic art and stuff, which is really cool. It's really nice. But if you just say you're to like sit down with a group of people who never played it and you're to put down a 30-page rule book, they're gonna look at that and be like, oh. But it doesn't have to be that long, but it's nice to have that extra artwork.
Mm-hmm. I think there are also companies. Fantasy Flight Games has been really good for this, where they have 2 rule books: a learn to play rule book, which kind of just does the basic stuff to get you going, and then they have a separate book that has a rule reference. Actually, Fury of Dracula had that as well, right? Just a rule reference, which we had to actually reference it a few times. It's always funny when I think like, oh, okay, these rule references, like some of these things, like these questions are so obscure,
right?
And yet, it happens, and you end up having to reference that.
Well, it's nice just to be able to be like, I know what I want to ask. I want to ask, say, like, if I want to look up a rule on movement, you just open up the glossary or whatever, and you look up movement, and then it'll say, okay, I don't know what I want, but at the bottom it'll be like other keywords. So you might be like running, so you can look up then running, and then that's what I want to look up, and it'll give you an answer. So they've done it very well, where you can have those quick learns, like, because usually the book will be a quick learn book, maybe an advanced rules book with a glossary in it. So you can be like, I want to get this game on the table, I want to start playing, here's a quick learn. It's like, I don't know, maybe 8 pages. They'll give you all the basic rules. And then if I want to add any advanced content, or I want to get deeper into the rules to like, fill out some of that, you can go to the advanced rule book. So there's
also, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. They've made it more accessible, which is nice.
Yeah. There's also some games that I've played where the first few pages of the rule book just kind of gives you the basic stuff. Right. And then it says, like, on page 4 or 5, it'll say, okay, now you know enough to play your first game.
Yeah.
So play your first game. Once you've done that, come back, and then we will explain more advanced game techniques and advanced rules, right?
Wasn't that with like
Um,
Legend of Andor? Did that?
yeah, actually, Legend of Andor is a very, I would say, a unique experience because the rule book is actually very uh, streamlined. And
Right.
so Legend of Andor, for people who don't know, is a adventure role-playing game, I guess. But on a board game. You're not like role-playing like Dungeons and Dragons. It's more of a fantasy
Yeah,
game.
you have your
Anyways,
character, and you can like level them up and like make them
yeah.
beefier
You
and
get like
like
equipment and stuff like that. So the game story is played through a deck of cards that advances as you guys like take turns and stuff like that. There's like a day night cycle kind of thing, all this stuff. So the very first one though is a quick tutorial. So in the rule book, it tells you just either to start playing it and it will tell you exactly what to do on the cards. Um, and the rule book has like a few kind of like setup instructions. But as you're playing through that tutorial, it gives you a story, but then at the same time, it explains like tokens that you're uncovering and enemies
yeah,
when they and how things are. So that was a really interesting way because a really interesting way of teaching or learning to play a game because I read that rule book before I brought the game over, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I understand the how to set the game up, but I don't really know how to play the game because you have to play the game
to learn it.
to learn it.
That's so good. That's great.
100% in any game, I think. Anyways,
Well, the game it physically is designed that you have to play it
To
to
learn it.
learn how to play the game, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily one of these games where you can read through the rule book and understand everything you have to do. Like they have like an advanced rule reference, but the basic mechanics of actually playing the game you learn through doing the tutorial, which is built directly into the game, which was actually a um, really cool mechanic, which I think makes that game very accessible to people. But then remember we played the second round and got completely obliterated.
Oh
So
my god, that game is so hard.
it is difficult, but it was a ton of fun.
Yeah,
And
it
it
was
was
great.
probably one of my most enjoyable learning experiences of playing a game because
Yeah,
it just gets you right in there.
Wingspan is also like that, where they have a deck of when you open the box, you unpack everything to play your first game. It comes with a introduction first and second round where they give you a deck of cards. Everybody gets some of those cards, and then it shows you instructions about, okay, if you have this card in your hand and you play it here, this will happen. And then you play about, I think it's 2 or 3 rounds with the cards they give you to start out. And then you kind of go from there where you start drawing your own cards, right? They kind of give you those first steps so that, by round 3 or 4, hopefully you've picked it up enough that you can be like, oh, okay, I have this card and I can now do this with it. So that's another really great beginner game, I think Wingspan is, with a nice short rule book and that great introduction to the rules in the first few rounds.
so you guys brought up quick reference guides, and that's where I'd like to go next. So some games do have that element where having the quick reference guide is hugely important. I don't want to bring up Catan too much because it'll hurt David's feelings, but Catan's one of them where you always have the building elements with you. Another one would be something like Pandemic.
Right.
Hold on, I can talk about Catan. I just don't like playing it.
No, we're making you a villain. It's fine.
I can hear him getting upset. Like I can hear the little tears hitting the microphone.
The fans want you to be the anti-Catan villain, and one day when we do a stream or a recording of Catan, we hope you're really grumpy the entire time.
I can't wait to play Catan with David. I can't wait.
So when it comes to quick reference guides, and I was thinking about this while you were talking, what is the biggest impact of having a quick reference guide? And would you like it if more games in their rule pamphlets or booklets had an FAQ as well? Now, the reason I ask this is you brought up 2 points where my mind was like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I find sometimes when you're contesting a rule or you're trying to figure something out, it's quickest to Google because you don't want to like plow through the pile of rules, right? So maybe an FAQ card would be kind of cool. I just want to know what your thoughts are on both of those.
I find that Googling isn't always quicker than flipping through a rule book. It's only faster for like obscure things that you can't find in the rule book. I think
Right.
we usually search online if we can't figure it out in the rule book, or if we don't want to house rule it, right? I
Yeah.
find that well, there are games that they have an FAQ, which is useless.
How dare
remember
you?
when we were playing? Remember when we were playing Set a Watch? Owen?
Oh God, yeah, a game.
That game is difficult, but I felt like the frequently asked questions in the end of the rulebook were useless and did not really answer any of our frequently asked questions during that game.
Well, they're very
Um,
specific.
Yeah, right. I find that if a game has more player control, right? So like if there's more things that a player can do, a quick reference guide that is either a double-sided card or part of their player board, or even a separate player board that can be passed around the table is an absolute must.
Yeah, I think every game should have a quick reference card, and any game that doesn't include one is like either like kind of they're shooting themselves in the foot, because we do have a few games that don't include quick reference cards or like a quick reference sheet on the back. I hate opening up a game and seeing the back of a rule book that's just a blank page or has like some like art or whatever on it and not a quick rules reference. Like those are things that are imperative to get people at the table and to like make the experience easy.
Mm-hmm.
Even just like a quick reference on what different icons are and stuff like that, because some games have really obscure icons that that are different from the traditional, like, okay, this is a power token, this is money, this is an enemy token or whatever. They don't necessarily say it specifically on the token, right? So just having a quick reference on what those things are on the back of the rule book is always very handy. But I find that having I'm pretty sure Scythe has them as well, right? Like a little kind of card.
Yeah, they actually they have a bunch of cards. I think
Yeah.
each person gets like 4 rule reference cards, so they have like just a deck of rule reference cards.
Horrified has quick reference cards. Like there's a ton of games that actually have these little quick reference cards, which for people who are learning the game, it's great because it prevents them from having to stop the flow of the game,
right?
To ask, oh, hold on, like what does this do, or what's my next turn, or like what's the turn order.
Dead of Winter has a really great system on their character sheet, because everybody gets a I forget what it's called, but it's essentially a character sheet where you keep all your tokens and stuff, and on it shows the phases of the game. It shows what the cleanup phase is like. It shows everything that you can do with the actions you have, and it's also well laid out that really, if you have any questions about what you can do on your turn, it's right there. It's right in front of you. It's right in the sheet. So, and unless you have any very specific questions and you need to go to the rule book, you don't have to.
Yeah, and Dead of Winter is a prime example of a game that has a lot going on. There's a lot of different phases and stuff like that, but because the way that the game is designed physically, it is very accessible for people to just kind of follow through, because once everyone's turn's done, everyone just looks at their player sheet there and is like, okay, well, now we're gonna clean
the
do this thing. We're
garbage
gonna pay our dues for food, check all of the stuff, right?
Check the waste, add zombies,
right? Like all of that stuff, and it makes it more of a community or a group thing, the end of phase stuff, because everyone can follow along, and it's not just one person who remembers or has the rule book with the reference guide on the back or whatever, where they're like, okay, well, now we have to do this. Like, now we have to do this. Everyone can kind of take part in something else, right? Like I always like having someone else check for the crisis, right? Like you have to
Right.
submit food or item, like different items or whatever. And it's always interesting, like just having someone else go through that deck to see if someone's sabotaged the group, right? Like,
Yeah. Or like someone could add
so
zombies while somebody's checking the waste, and somebody's yeah, everybody can help out that way because they can all
yeah.
see the rules reference and all see like the phase order.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that. It's such um, it's a great way to get people into the game and make sure that they're able to follow along and know what they can do. Because nothing's worse than sitting there and having someone like, oh, what can I do in my turn? Well, it's like, well, no,
Mm-hmm.
you can see it's right in front of you, right?
And then there's always games that either have really bad quick reference guides or they just don't include one.
Yeah.
And then that's where the community, the bigger board game community comes into play.
Yes.
There's so many people that take time out of their day to streamline rulebooks and create quick reference guides and stuff like that, and they upload it to the game profile on Board Game Geek. I've lost track of the number of games that I've printed off community made reference guides because they are just so desperately needed. Arkham Horror second edition is one that I've printed off like 4 or 5 different reference guides because that game, now it's in the third edition now, which they've done a major overhaul on the game in general, and it's a lot easier to learn and play and put together. But the second edition of Arkham Horror, is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the rule book is so in depth, and this is the Fantasy Flight Games, and I think this was one of like their earlier games before they got good at making rule books.
Oh, that's the
like
same with like some of their other Arkham properties. Their early stuff is just terrible.
mm-hmm. So like there's so much going on into that game that it needs a concise and compact but easy to understand quick reference guide. So I had to actually download like a bunch just to have them in the game. That game is so hard, and
Yeah.
I understand why they did the third edition. And if you compare the two, the second and third edition, like it's completely different. But then there's Eldritch Horror, which came out after Arkham Horror, which was more of a streamlined version of Arkham Horror. So that is generally considered the easier game to learn and play if you want to play like a traditional or an earlier Arkham or Lovecraft Fantasy Flight game.
Yeah, I've ended up printing out a bunch of quick rules reference for Twilight Imperium just because that game is so huge. And again, like it's already a super long game. You're thinking like 8 to 12 hours to play it. And then to teach it, you're going to spend another 2 hours just teaching that game, like, or an hour to 2 hours, just like explaining everything that's happening. So again, I went on Board Game Geek, the amazing website that it is, and somebody made all these amazing reference sheets and reference material. So I was able to print that out, and like I can hand one out to each player and be like, okay, I'm going to break this down to you, like what's on this reference sheet, and then you can reference this like for the phase order, for turns, what you can do, what all the stuff does. So instead of like someone asking me a question as the person who knows it, and me either giving them a poor explanation or having to read right out of the rule book, they can look at it themselves. So.
Interesting. So I feel like we could do an entire episode on just reference guides versus rule books, but I want to continue the conversation along and move into something that David just brought up, and that's house rules. Are they welcome, and why is the first game you think of when house rules gets applied to is either beer pong or Monopoly?
Well, is there actually rules?
Is beer pong considered a board game?
It's a board game, I think. Is it?
Yeah,
a board
it's played
game?
on.
I guess it's a table. It's a tabletop game.
Yeah, it's a tabletop game.
No, it's just famously known for house rules because every house you go over to, there's different rules, right? But the same applies to something like Monopoly, where it's like it's widely known that there's a very big difference between the actual rules and landing on get out of jail or free parking versus house rules. Can you go around the board once without purchasing? If you don't, is it free to go to auction, or is there a one turn, like I guess it's a pause. Everything's different in Monopoly. I don't think I've ever played the same game of Monopoly twice.
So like for me, house rules, I don't play by house rules too often just because like the designer wrote the game to be a certain way. If something's broken, if we're playing a game and it's just broken and it's not working and it's not fun, yeah, we'll be like, okay, like this needs to be maybe altered a bit. But for generally, I don't use house rules.
I'm not against house rules per se. I find that there's a time and place for them. If you are, and we've come into this a few times where we've been playing a game and halfway we realize that we're playing something incorrectly. It hasn't necessarily broken the game, but we either weren't paying something or earning something when we should have been. So at that point, I think it's acceptable to create a house rule for that session.
Yeah, like
instead of changing how you guys are playing the game halfway through, just keep playing it that way as long as everyone is okay with it.
Yeah, in agreement. It's like, that's fair. I think, if you're making a small mistake, and you might as well just, continue on doing that and just make a note for the next time you play. Okay, we got to change this for sure.
Now, there was an incident that happened recently when we were playing a game.
An incident?
Uh-oh.
When we were playing a good old game called Betrayal at House on the Hill.
All right.
Is this going to be about the time that somebody died and tried to come back to life?
No.
Good.
So this was, if you remember, the traitor, our good friend Angela, also known as my girlfriend. she was trying to. She made a move. She had played this move out in her head, and she played it on the board.
Which we saw her pre-count, just for the record.
She was doing all of this stuff, and we let her play it out. After the fact, Owen tells her that, this would be a better way for you to do this. If you were to go this way, you'd be one space closer. You could then attack, blah, 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 blah. So then she was going to do that. I understand that. But this is where...
Oh, no.
This is where a house rule can come into play.
No,
because we decided. Well, it wasn't even that. It was, especially in a game where you're competitive, and that I don't know why you personally were helping the trader, because, like, did you want us to lose?
We were moments away from winning.
I just wanted it to be a good game for everybody. Okay,
it was a great game for
everybody. Had fun.
So in that case, though, we decided, or at least I told you guys, no. She made the move, right? So it is not fair to let her, or let anyone really, change their move because someone else tells them a better move, right? That's kind of, you are now playing for them and telling them, oh no, like this is better. And I feel like in that instance, sometimes, like, if it was, it also depends on the type of game, right? Like, if we're all working together, I think people are more likely to be like, okay, you know what, do that instead. Because in a co-op game, you're all working towards one goal. But once it turns into a competitive game, it's the same idea as some people play, where once you let go of your token, your miniature, or once the dice is rolled, that's what you have to stick with, right?
That's a universal rule in all games ever. You pick up you take your hand off your movement piece, it's over.
But that's not really a house rule, because he was trying to be nice. No, but see, the thing is it nowhere nowhere in the rule book does it say, you cannot redo or you cannot change your move after the fact, right? That's the thing. This is kind of like you said, it's a universal house rule, but it's not always enforced, right? And it really depends on the type of game and the people that you're playing with. In this case, I did some stuff in that game where I could have moved somewhere else, or whatnot, right? That would have been more. It would have ended better for us at the time, but I didn't, because in my mind I'm thinking, okay, well, I made that decision. I moved my character there, or whatever.
You were also in a crusty mood most of that game, because
No, it wasn't.
Owen and I wanted to spend a lot of the time in the vault, just to be in the vault, and we
The
were
vault
playing
was
off.
cool.
Yeah, we were playing off your energy, and I think secretly we were doing it to bother you, but it's okay.
I don't think it was a secret. Everyone knew.
I wanted the sweet contents of that vault. That's all I
So-
wanted.
Yeah, and then I got it. And then I
Yeah.
got another vault.
Let's
Anyway,
stop the
so
conversation on betrayal because we have a special presentation, and our next episode after this one will be based on betrayal solely. So let's not talk about that game anymore.
Okay.
Like
Yes,
we don't
yes,
want to ruin the
yes,
punchline. Let's go into our final topic of today. And this one is one that I'm very excited to hear your opinions on. It's the challenges of teaching games and how good is the teacher?
Oh God. So this is I love board games. I love showing people board games. I love sharing people with board games. I suck at explaining rules. I'm just gonna say
I can confirm that.
Yeah. I am
Owen
not
is terrible at explaining rules.
I am not good at it, and it upsets me because I want to be good at it. I like as a hobby, I sit around and I read rule books just because I love flipping through them and reading all the mechanics and stuff. But yeah, when it comes to actually sitting down and playing a game with people and being like, "Oh, I got this game I want to show you," and get all the pieces out, and I start reading the rule book, and it just sounds like word garbage coming out of my mouth. It's
Not
terrible.
word garbage.
It's word garbage.
I've noticed this with you, Owen, and do not take offense to this because I've told you this before anyway. So, but
It upsets me every time.
You'll start reading the rule book, but then I feel like you get so kind of like engrossed into the rules that you just start mumbling. So
yeah,
it makes it very.
If it's a very long-winded sentence, I'll be like, okay, and you do this and this and this,
and I think that's when it comes down to, and this is a prime example of. Owen, you know how to play a lot of these games where I feel like if you are going to teach someone, it is better to actually just show them rather than like explain the basic mechanics of what the action is, or what the character has to do, but then just kind of show them an example.
Yeah.
Whereas I personally sometimes am not very good at setting up an example or showing them. So I'll just read through the rule book. And I did this with Cthulhu Death May Die. And when we played Mansions of Madness, I would read the rule part of, character movement or moving an enemy or something, and then just kind of show it on the board. Right. So
yeah, I think I'm going to do that with the next time I have to teach Twilight Imperium. I started doing this a little bit last time I taught it. But yeah, you set up a little section of the board, or you set up the board and you kind of play through like the first, like you do a one round, you do like a mock round, or you do like just like a little example of like how things work and how things move and how stuff like interacts.
I think like a good one, because you love the game so much, Dark Moon.
I do. I love Dark Moon.
That is a great game that you can easily set up and play a few rounds and explain, like show, the rolling of the dice. That, that game is it's like a hidden dice game, hidden roll game, whatever.
Yeah.
But you can explain it by rolling the dice without having it hidden, so that people can see, okay, I'm going to roll these dice. This is the potentially what can come up, and this is what I can do with this. Right.
Yeah. Right.
It depends on, obviously, like there's a few different factors that you have to take into account when teaching the games. One is how well do you know the game? Because if you have just picked the game up and you haven't played it, sometimes games aren't friendly for one person to play. There's been a few times where I've been trying to learn a game and it's for 2 to 5 players. So I will actually set the game up and play 2 different players at the same time just to be able to understand the mechanics better.
Yeah. See,
it's kind of a pain in the butt, but it's sometimes you have to do that, right?
So that's what I do. So I'll read a rule book front to back like 2 or 3 times before I sit down and actually play the game with people. And then I'll still run into situations where like, oh, how does this work? How does this work? And I find that I don't actually learn the game until maybe the second or third time I play it. Because then as you're playing it, you might have these fiddly little questions like, oh, what if this does, like, how does this interact with this? Or like, what happens if I do this? And you don't actually start to like learn until you start doing some of
Mhm.
those movements or whatever.
And an example of a time that didn't happen, which because it was impossible, was when I was learning to play Fury of Dracula. I read that rule book, and with that, I just took the components and tried to understand. And then we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of YouTube videos with how to play videos, right? So I will read the rule book and then watch a how to play video with, and sometimes reviews, even people explain, like the Dice Tower, like Tom Vassell. Some of his videos are really good at explaining
Like the
the
basic rules.
basics, the
Yeah.
basic mechanics of the game. So same thing with the Shut Up and Sit Down, like they do a really good job at explaining the rules and how to play games in their reviews. So like there's a ton of resources on out there that will let people understand the game better if they are unable to play it right at the moment that they're trying to learn it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, and we've mentioned this before, it depends on who you're playing with as well, right? Not everyone is able to learn a game just by listening or reading rules. They have to see how the game plays out.
Yeah.
So that's when, if you can set up the game to play a few rounds, right?
Yeah.
And explain that to them, at least give them the idea. So, and there's been a few times where if I'm playing a new game, right? Like Twilight Imperium was one. The first time we played, I still had no idea what we were doing. Same thing with Scythe. I still don't really know what I'm doing with that game. It was a lot of fun, but I'm more willing to put my turn at the end of everyone else's.
Yeah,
So
usually
that I can see how the game plays. Yeah.
It's the first person, like they're the person who knows the rule book goes first, so they can show everybody the first turn, right? That's kind of like how it goes. You don't want to give somebody who's never played the game, here, you're the first player, and they're gonna be like, "What do I do?"
Mm-hmm. And then also, Owen, you're not very good at this, though.
I know.
Wow, just kick him while he's down.
You're not very good at this. Where if you're good at a game, if you're playing it with other people, you will still try and completely obliterate them.
So I'm just gonna say I am not very good at board games. I play them and I love them. I'm not good at them.
with Scythe, what the first time we played that game, you completely destroyed like everyone at the table. And meanwhile, the whole time I'm still trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing in that game. It doesn't bother me, but I know that with some people, like they can be very competitive. Sean, you're a very competitive player. Right?
Says who?
Are you serious?
Yeah. I'm super competitive at everything I do.
So, I feel like if you were to explain, say, Risk to me, right? I feel like you wouldn't hold back completely destroying me in that game. That's just because that's kind of in your nature. Like you're a competitive person. So I think when you're teaching games to people, even if you are super good at the game, if you know the strategy, sometimes I personally will like kind of take a mulligan on myself, and I'm not going to do a move just because I know that it completely destroys someone's experience in a game. That's why I hate games with player elimination.
Yeah,
because generally they will be a little more complicated, but once that player is out of the game, they're done, right? And then they sit there while everyone's playing and having fun. And it's not necessarily going to be the shortest games either, right?
Risk is a terrible example of that, though, because player elimination in that game is imperative to completion of the game. But you could be eliminated and the game could go on for another 2 hours just because you played poorly.
And you have to sit there.
And if you're playing with, 2 or 3 other people, though, if you're the first one out, then, okay, well, I'm going to go home, right? Because there's no point in me sitting around watching you guys play Risk.
Yeah, I've been involved in one of those where I eliminated the girl and she went for a nap. We played for like another hour and a half.
It
was rough. Yeah, it was one of those situations where I kind of got into we made an ally ship, but eventually your army gets too big and you have to take out Canada. It just happened that way.
What?
Yeah, I was taking over the board. Eventually you have to like turn on your allies. It's the only way you can keep going.
You monster.
I know, I'm horrible. So I think that's it for this one, is it not, guys? That's a lot of information to unpack.
So I just want to say I actually went through my board game collection and I started stacking up board games on my table in front of me that like had interesting rule books and stuff, but that's fine.
I want to
I want to talk
I
about all
want
my
to
board
just
games.
yeah, I want to actually say that there are some games like that the rulebook is so poorly designed
Yep.
that it has actually made the game impossible to play.
Yep.
Without specifically saying the game, because I think the game itself is a good game, but the rulebook, it took us when I was learning to play this game, it took me and two other people almost 3 hours just to try and basically understand the game, because the rulebook was designed in such a way that one rule would tell you to reference something else, which would then tell you to reference a third thing, which would then tell you to reference that first thing over again. And the whole book was kind of like filled with these, oh, check out how to do this on page whatever. And it made it very, very difficult to learn the game.
It's a riddle.
And that's when you start seeing that's when you see second and third editions of games come out. And for the most part, when that happens, it's because they've fixed the rule books, right? So
yeah, no, I have one or two games that they just never hit the table just because like you crack open the rule book and you're like, this is bad. Like
it's impossible, right? It makes it impossible to teach that game, which is unfortunate because I feel like there's a lot of good games that get missed or that don't get played because it's either a new company that hasn't really learned how to make a rule book, or it just certain things fell through the cracks, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited to now take this newfound knowledge of rules and put it to use, but also be a little bit more mindful and wary when we are playing our next game. And when the three of us play our next game, I'll just listen to David and not Owen because David says Owen's a bad person.
Oh, I never said he's a bad person.
That's what this podcast has taught me today, that Owen is bad at stuff and he's not good at games. That's it.
I wouldn't go that far.
These are the words that David said.
That's very nice.
I'm pretty sure I never said any of that.
No, it's all in good fun. I'll personally say before I wrap this up that playing games with both the dynamic of David and Owen has actually taught me a little bit more about each game, but their play styles are very different, and they do humble my ass when I want to be a little bit too competitive because I am also learning how to play these games. They are very good teachers, and if we ever do get into Let's Plays, they would be two of the best people to learn games from. And I say that because I've learned games from them. They've taught me a bunch, and I can't wait to learn more. With that being said, this is it for us for today, and we will see you in 2 weeks where we talk about betrayal and everything about betrayal. For myself, David, and Owen, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next episode.